Hi everyone, my name's Nare, and I'm one of the co-founders at Ntropy, where we build products for the post-data world. I know it's quite funny at times where everybody's talking about data and how important it is, how data is the new fuel, the new oil, gas, whatever. We're talking about a post-data world already, but I'll explain what we mean by this. Get ready to be a bit surprised. So today I'm going to talk about this journey from data to dating, privacy and personalization through the lens of modern romance. But first, let's understand what we mean by this phrase, post-data world, and what data means as well. So in the way we define it, and one of the most common definitions as well, is data is a form of identification that allows you to tap into the current social and economic society by authenticating your input in that society. So before that, the panel was speaking about privacy and how important it is. So in an ideal case scenario, nobody would need to know nothing, sorry for the double negatives, about anyone, and we would all be able to do whatever we want, and the society would still work. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So we need to have information about people to be able to have a society that functions. A post-data world is a world where data is not a competitive advantage anymore. So there's an abundance of data. There will be more than we have today, but it is all owned and processed and controlled by the end user. And hence, for companies and products, it's not an advantage. I hope we'll come to a world like that. So a short history of data. It started in the Roman Empire when if you wanted to buy something from property to any form of transaction, you had to make notes about your transaction history on jewelry and then stones. That took quite a while, and only in the 1800s we started using something more sophisticated, which is forms of ID that had photographs on them. And this way the government could know who's doing what and how well behaved you were and how you could take part in the society. And then today we're living in times when we have our identity dispersed among different companies and services. So it's a heterogeneous identity that doesn't belong to us anymore. And it's not just our transaction history, it's also what we like, who we like, our preferences, our interests, from sexual to mood and so on. And it all is on the internet because most of us are the citizens of the internet. And it's owned by the few and controlled by the few. So if I think about my data self today, it's comprised of the government ID, info, biometrics, the data I share with products and services that I agree to share because I'm using them, and also data that is inferred about me from my previous behavior and people like me. This inference is not necessarily what I always agreed to, but it is heavily used to show me stuff and to tell me what to do while I'm online. So we ended up in a world that's quite scary because what I think, what I know, what I believe, who I love, and even who I vote for is now decided and controlled by companies that are driven by profit. The problem here is we have a transaction that's two-sided. It's the users and these companies, and the incentive is misaligned. The reason it's misaligned is because one side of the transaction knows exactly what's going to happen in the end. They are paid for the information that they have on us. And the other side, which is us, we have no idea. We have no idea where this data ends up. We have no idea how much they're paid for this and what is going on in general. All we have is beautiful products and services that seem to know a lot about us. And last year was the amalgamation of this. We started Ntropy last year, and I think everybody has agreed, even this guy, that the future is private and it's personal. But how do we go about building this future? This is me and my co-founder deciding that we're going to help change it, just the two of us, about 10, 11 months ago. And we started by thinking, okay, we're first going to build the most personal and private app out there to gain mainstream usage and to have persona profiles that are even more detailed and better than Facebook, Google, and all these guys have on us. But the first thing we had to do is to define the audience. So who are we building this for? And this is how we came to realize that actually the perfect audience for this are Generation Z girls. These are girls who are about 17 to 22-year-old. Why is this the perfect audience for an app like this? Well, we've learned by data. So we did this experiment where we bought a lot of Facebook advertising, and in the ads, we would basically tell people exactly how we were targeting them. We would tell you, you are a 50-year-old male who reads The Economist, probably prefers this brand, and doesn't care about gluten. And then we'd say, if you want to learn more, please click here. So the people who actually cared most about this were the Generation Z girls. Not only they cared about what the web has on them, what they know about them, but also they knew exactly how this process is going on. So we would get emails and comments and even people coming to our offices in Shoreditch trying to understand what does Facebook actually know about them and how can they stop this. So they do care most. That's why we're building a product for them that's personal and private at the same time. We are building a product for them because their first encounter of the internet was a violation of consent. It means they started using services that are heavily centralized already without them agreeing to it. And we're also building it because we're in a community, in the Twitter bubbles, in the crypto bubble, in so many bubbles where we love pleasing ourselves and our peers. It's all about what our peers think about us. We build product for people like us. And that doesn't necessarily work because we have brilliant products for this community that are already private. I don't know how they're going to transcend to the other side, to the users who do not necessarily know about how the backend works, because decentralization is a cost. I think we all know that, and it has to come with an award. That's why we're building for this girls. So another thing we tested with data is we tried to understand which of these areas they care about most. We started by building a game and entertainment, what I watch, and tried to lure them in this way to get them to play and understand what the data is by creating data creatures. We also tried to, we built another app for commerce where the more data they gave, the more items they were shown that they could get access to. And then in the end, we realized from engagement that there's a huge problem about who they love. So they live in a world that is so connected at the same time they really lack connection. It is so personal, but at the same time, they feel like it's also not about them anymore. And that's why we decided to build a product that addresses this problem of loneliness, of not understanding where you belong and not being able to communicate with others in a meaningful way. So we believe that love is a skill, not an emotion, and we can train it. And the ways to train it today are therapy, coaching, self-help books, really not well geared for this audience. So we decided to build our first privacy-preserving personal app, which is called Humans. It's currently in private testing. It doesn't look like this. It's just because my presentation was live, and yeah, the PDF just screwed it. It's a personal relationship trainer. And what it does, it basically, we took real-life conversations and created mock social puzzles where you would go through a text messaging and would pick options that would tell about your preferences, your personality, your mood, and a lot of other personal data. And then according to that, the outcome of the conversation would be decided. And you would train skills like body confidence, emotional intelligence, trust, communication, and sex and sexuality. Guess what? They loved it. And I'm actually really happy to talk about this here, where people normally talk about different side of this problem, because we have people deleting and re-downloading the app a lot of times to find new content there, because we have limited content yet. And some people would go and re-download it 7 times asking for more. So they are engaged, they're sharing their data and creating these profiles, and this is the first time that it will fully belong to them. Yeah, we are at Ntropy with our first app. We're creating the richest and most dynamic decentralized persona profiles. A lot of people would say, isn't it easier just to take your data out of Facebook and Twitter and Google and all of these services that already know so much about us? Well, it's not, because first of all, it's dead. It's just a dead file, and you need to depend on these services and have access to them to make it dynamic and make it live and make any use of it. And second of all, to compete with all of that, you need to have more and better. And the way we can create better data ecosystem is by making it transparent. So these guys share more, but they also know that it only belongs to them. We think this is a way to go towards an ecosystem from the other side. So instead of building in the beginning bits and pieces of the infrastructure that are absolutely necessary and the community is doing everything for, we're starting from the data and we're starting from the user. So how do we build it? We have a super personal user data set that is solely controlled and owned by them. This is the first part that we're doing now, and it's working. Then we have decentralized and secure collection, storage, and management of the data, which is absolutely necessary. And some of the companies after me, I think, address that problem as well, how to do that. And we hope to integrate with them to be able to bring this to our users. Next layer is privacy-preserving personalization, because if you build products that have no personalization, nobody's going to use them. Try to log on Facebook with another name and without your friends there and without liking anything. It's a dodgy, shady place you would never want to get back to. I actually tried a few times. And the last layer is the interoperability. Sorry. This is absolutely necessary, because if we want experiences that are better than today, these apps need to speak to each other, and the data needs to speak to one another that's collected there, because then you can have apps that are truly intelligent and clever and know what you want exactly when you want it. And the price that you pay for decentralization comes with a bigger reward. We want to end up in a world where areas of life that are owned and controlled by us are truly ours. So who we love, what we believe, what we buy, where we work, who we vote for, and so on. And that's why we're starting it right now. Thank you. Please ask me questions. Normally when people don't ask questions, it's either what the hell was she talking about, or oh, this was great, I got everything. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, the reason why we started there is not because we wanted to, but because we tested it, right? We built things and then we gave it to people, starting from the very basics, going up there. And at the lowest level, it seemed like people are very well served with Web 2 products, at least right now. So it's really hard to compete with a news app or a social connection app or anything like that. The data we collect is not about love or relationships. It's about who you are from all sides of stuff. And I say we collect, it's a really bad way of saying it. The data that is collected and belongs to the user is about everything. It's just the channel that we use is this channel because they do care about it. They feel lonely, they want to get better, they want to learn, and it's a great place to get started. So the idea is that these persona profiles, the super personal persona profiles, will be able to be used across, if you want to build a running app to test someone's fitness levels, if you want to build a food app to understand what food preferences someone has, to mood, like a music app or anything else, just because of the type of information that's being shared. Okay, so yeah, that's a really fair question. So things, once you collect the data, then what do you do with it? Things start to get more complicated. So currently everything is on the edge, it's on device, and we do not do any personalization at the moment. We don't even collect, so basically if you log in once, the device ID is your only identifier. And the idea is once we have enough data, then the next layer, the privacy-preserving personalization, will come on top that will do this recommendations. At the moment, it's a lot slower, but there's a lot of progress since last year. A lot of people are working on it, from OpenMind to there are a bunch of other companies who are doing this really well. So we will get there. Right now, it all belongs to them. It's on their device. They're the only people who have key to it, who can access it. Thank you.
Check, check. Oh, wow, I sound good. Okay. What a beautiful day for the blockchain, everybody. I'm very excited to talk a little bit with you today. I'm Paul Warren. I'm the head of product at Keyless, which is a platform for decentralized authentication, which I don't expect you to understand immediately out of the gate, but I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit about identity first. So at Keyless, basically what we're trying to do is make data privacy and security the rule rather than the exception in the way we use the internet, which is very much not the case today. Basically taking some powerful security technology and putting it in the hands of average users. The problem we noticed is that authentication on the internet was functionally broken, and this is because the internet was built without a layer for identity. And when you don't have a layer for identity, you have billions of users with their credentials exposed, their privacy compromised, and there's actually billions of dollars in value lost in this way. And we see this as a result of two underlying core issues. One is an insecure architecture. So functionally, if I'm holding all of your sensitive information, your credentials or personal information in the same place, it's open to system-wide attacks. And we talked about Equifax a couple years ago, 143 million user accounts at the same time, which is embarrassing. But this will keep happening because nobody has changed the architecture. And on the other side, as people were getting more concerned on a macro level about what is happening with our data, and thankfully in Europe at least, we're starting to see some regulation around GDPR saying there is or isn't a way to handle people's data. Actually in America now, we're starting to see some push in that direction. But functionally, we want that data to be handled in the right way. And the other side of identity is the user experience. So the Band-Aid that we've had up to date is the username and the password, which if you think of it, is kind of ridiculous that it's still around, but it's spread out in a whole bunch of different places. That said, when we change the architecture to something that's decentralized, we've introduced a much worse version of the password, which I'll get into in a second. So this beautiful drawing here that I've made explains the identity relationships we've had for a while. So we had these siloed identities, say with your bank or Amazon or something, where you're basically renting your identity from a company. And because this is a little bit awkward, we've seen a shift to more user-centric identities where you sit at the center of the identity experience. So perhaps the best example are what are federated identities. So Facebook Connect or login with Google, where essentially one company owns you, and it's easier to use across a bunch of different portals or places. That said, when one company owns you, they get a lot of data and they creepily track you around the internet, which is not super fun. So the next version of this identity is something that you own yourself, an identity that you actually own. A term was created around 2012 called self-sovereign identity, which I think is the name of the panel we'll be discussing, which is a needlessly complex and ridiculous and technical sounding term for something that's actually pretty cool. So we're moving more towards decentralized identity today as a term, but something that you own. So this comes with a different paradigm. Functionally, we as people haven't owned our own identities or our own assets ourselves for a long time, acting as custodians. What this means in this space is essentially you need a complex passwords that you hold on to. So this started with the private key. You'll see a nice one up there, and was simplified with a 12 to 24 word mnemonic phrase called a seed that a lot of people in the audience will be familiar with that generate deterministic wallets or unique identities. The peculiar thing about this seed, this new password for your identity, is if you lose it, you lose access to your assets or identity forever, which is kind of ridiculous. So if we take the case of Bitcoin alone, $30 billion, depending on the day, because it's a little volatile, in Bitcoin value has just been lost. And I wanted to ask the audience, has anybody lost their password and lost their assets? There we go. Little blockchain in the room. So functionally, you lose this password, you lose everything. And when a user is introduced to this for the first time, it's very weird. They're told to write it down on a sheet of paper somewhere and keep it in their mom's safe, which my co-founder Fabian does if you're looking. So, so we sort of have to change this paradigm to something that is actually useful to make this new identity that we own work. And I think of it as three pillars. It needs to be usable, it needs to be private, and it needs to be useful. Usable means the experience around identity has to be simple enough that maybe your grandmother could use it, but something that's natural and recoverable. Private is important because if we don't make these systems private, we won't be able to put more information into them. If I'm making disclosures I don't want to make without consent, there's no incentive for me to use these new identities. And the last piece is useful. So the first stabs at sovereign identity, if anybody has downloaded the uPorter Civic wallet a couple years ago when it first happened, it's like amazing. I have this blockchain-based identity. Now what the heck do I do with it? There's really not a lot of impetus. So you need real-world use cases that make sense for people and frankly also for businesses to put this stuff out there because sovereign identities by themselves are not viral. It's not a viral product. So when we try to bring this sovereign identity into existence, this is a well oversimplified stack, and I think a couple of other people here have important contributions, but I see at the base of this key management protocols that effectively connect the human being to the keys related to their identity, to associate them to that digital identity. The second is public key infrastructures, or PKIs, that generally need to exist on blockchains, and I'll explain why. So this is where your identity lives digitally, and that identity needs to be persistent, censorship resistant, and not owned by a single party. And what I mean by that specifically is you don't want anybody to be able to take it away from you, or else you don't own it. So that has to exist in a system that has that sort of infrastructure. That's a blockchain. And then finally, on top of this, we need actual applications for identity. And I think a lot of the mistakes that were made initially was that it was too generalized, and we need real-world use cases for this. So now we're looking at identities in medicine, identities for payments, identities for going to bars, and this stuff all has to come together. We're using old slides. That was the one. So where keyless sits is at the bottom of this stack, and I think we're essentially solving this problem of, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So how do you associate a real person to that digital identity sitting up there? And here's a video of Mark Zuckerberg, a champion of sovereign identity. I don't think, can you play it? Or can I? Yeah. Hi, I'm Mark Zuckerberg. I don't like your identity, blah, blah. Okay. Basically, the point he's trying to make is that decentralized authentication is one of the few uses of blockchain that actually makes sense to him. Basically, if I could put Facebook Connect into the hands of the people so anybody could publish on a unique sovereign authentication, that could be an interesting use. And what we propose generally at Keyless is an end to the traditional enterprise kind of data breach by removing the honeypot at the infrastructure layer and pair it with a user experience that actually makes sense for the end user. What this is for us is a decentralized, privacy-first protocol for authentication and identity management that's driven by user-friendly biometrics, where we try to get all these benefits of distributed computation and public-private key cryptography, but pair it with something that shouldn't be much harder to use than opening your iPhone 10. And our protocol is taking raw biometric signals like your face or even the way you're typing, swiping, and holding your phone. These are behaviorals, encrypting them locally on your device, and then sending it to a network where we can do matching in the encrypted domain on that data. So this is a trustless environment. Anybody can yank up a node with what is essentially biometric authentication data. And once we know that you're you with a little distance match between templates, what we can then say is, let's recreate this user's private keys on the fly. So the user never has to hold or see their private key or see it again. It's a keyless experience, which is why the name is so brilliant. Hold for laugh. We see this as enabling three core use cases: access management, compliance services, and enterprise key management. But importantly, I see it as underpinning a shift in value in identity. So the identity and access management sector is meant to reach $40 billion by 2023. That's a large and fast-growing market, but I see the market for what I think of as self-identification or value-added identity as actually much larger, because these kind of systems can tie into existing IAM solutions, and have to, because that's where a lot of the action is in enterprise, but allow you to do some serious new functionality on top of it. So to give you an example, one thing is we can make more claims about ourselves with these identities, and I think our first speaker touched on it, but if you know your data is getting processed in a private way, you can allow for much better targeted selective advertising. And some of the first examples of this I see are in things like the Brave browser, now with more than 5.5 million monthly active users, which for any decentralized product is kind of insane. Which shows the demand for something that's private and allows for more targeted advertising. And they're actually rewarding the user themselves for their attention in tokens. So there's that. Another example is the fact that when you have an identity like this, it's portable. So if I had a Facebook Connect that was owned by me, I can attach all sorts of other fun metadata and claims to it. Things like this are a KYC or AML check, right? If I trust that provider, I can stick that claim using cryptography to an identity. And then all of a sudden, the experience is sort of frictionless for the end user. The product on FIDO, for example, gets to distribute much quicker, and for the business, users are onboarded much quicker. So to tie this whole thing off, the reason I'm so excited about working in the space is that it gives us the chance to give a little bit of power back to the user for the first time in a long time while still building value, which is a strange experience. Normally, we're used to using you as a product. And I'd say everybody in the room has a bit of a horse in this race, because if we have to choose between being products or people online that get rewarded, I think we all would choose the latter every single time. So thank you. I'm not taking questions now. I'll wait to the panel, but I appreciate the attention.
Cool. All right, I guess I can start by telling you my name while we wait. I'm Danny Zuckerman. I'm the founder, or one of the 3 founders of 3box. We almost good? Cool. 3box is a user data cloud. So this is going to fit in really well with the first couple of presentations we just heard. I think most of us are... Mike, okay? You guys hear me okay? Hang on.
All right. Good? All right, let's try this again. Okay, we're probably mostly familiar with some of the symptoms of poor identity and user data online today. So breaches, hacks, a couple of our speakers already talked about this. I'm going to try and go a little bit fast to make up some time. One thing I want to start with, we talk about identity, self-sovereign identity. Even if we don't throw like self-sovereign in there, which I completely agree, it's an overly complicated word, identity itself is a really tough term, a really big concept. It's not one problem to solve, it's a huge series of problems. So typically we think of it as identification, authentication, authorization. If you go to identity conferences, that's the construct people use. Each of those also have a whole bunch of pieces within it. So a whole bunch of challenges, each of which need to be solved for a good identity system to actually work. And then, of course, there's lots of ways that identity is applied to things like ad targeting or reputation or scoring on platforms. So all these different pieces make up identity. And the systems we have today for identity, or what we call identity, are just fundamentally flawed if we want to extend them to a digital world. So really briefly, like government issued, I think Nare talked about the first situations where we had like government issued identities. Those are really designed to collect taxes and conscript people and keep track of an ever-growing population, not designed for a digital world. Social platforms, Facebook and Google, they basically are trying to get better and better rich identity sets on you so they can do better ad targeting. That's what they're designed for. And then enterprise solutions are meant for very narrow circumstances to manage access control and user identities within an enterprise context. None of these are going to scale up to a digital identity system that works. So if we want to build an identity system that solves some of the problems on the first page, the breaches, the lack of control, how do we start? Like there's so many different boxes on this slide, we can't do all of them at once. So the approach we take at 3box is to say start with data. Data is the simple, valuable primitive that everything else builds up from. So whether we're talking about credentials, the government-issued pieces of identification of who you are, or transaction history, or sensor data from the IoT devices in your home, everything at the end of the day is data when we're in a digital context. There's also a huge demand for data online. It's basically the currency of the web, or the sugar of the web today. It's what most of the services we use are paid for with and based on. We need it for good personalization, for good experiences online. When we start accumulating this data over time, we actually are building up a rich picture of who we are. That is our identity. Identity is not this one thing that's assigned to you. It's not this one core, even outside the digital world. In the physical world, none of us are one person all the time. We have a different rich personality, different data sets, depending on the context. And so it's by accumulating all of this data around us in a unified way that we can start to build up a picture of who we are. Now, of course, we need to be able to control that instead of relying on Google, as they try to pull all of the different data together. So how do we do that? And Paul just talked about this quite a bit. Do we have the next slide? Getting all the technical issues out of the day early. Of course, it's the architecture slide up next, so I can't just talk to that one. I'll try to, though. So you as a user, there's a whole bunch of ways that you authenticate online today. Email address and password is one. Biometrics are being built now as another. If you use Ethereum or other blockchains, you're familiar with the seeds and the private keys. So, all right, I think we're going to get it now. There we go. So what 3box has built is basically a way for you to control your data that we just talked about. So an interoperable, user-centric, distributed data cloud. All of your data unified around you. Now, how do we make that usable? So you're the user. You have these different ways to authenticate, depending on which ones you choose to trust. And we've built basically all of those for us are modules that authenticate to your decentralized identifier. The DID is a spec that's been built with Microsoft, Accenture, Sovereign, Brave, a whole bunch of others, collaborating on a spec to basically give you a personal URI that follows you around across networks in a decentralized way. So it's a spec that basically guarantees you can have this identifier that only you can control that identifies you across these different networks. So we have that interoperability. And then we basically take our version of a DID that guarantees this interoperability against whether you're talking about the Ethereum network or Web 2, traditional applications, whatever you want to use it to. That's how you authenticate into what we've built as basically a user-controlled encrypted data store. So it's a data store on a distributed network and an open network that anybody can access, but all of the data is associated to you as a user and encrypted by you, so you have control over it. And that's built on top of some new technology, IPFS, OrbitDB. So how do we actually make this usable? Because that's kind of a general technology. The products that we have at 3box are basically APIs for developers to store their data on this open network and store their data with the user. So we're not asking you as a user to start going and gathering all of your data. We're saying as developers, for most, Facebook's not going to do this. They make their money off of trading on user data. But for most applications today, they want to deliver a personal experience, but they actually don't want the liability of having to store and secure the data. It's a huge complexity, a huge added burden. So now they can use APIs to access all your profile data already on open networks, so they don't have to ask you to sign in and create it again, to store any data about who you are, to build decentralized messaging, and to store cookies and other data about you with you. And so each time you come back, you bring your data back to them. And actually, they can now access not just the data from their application, but any other application that's using this system. We start to get this rich ecosystem of data that anybody can use to deliver great experiences, but without compromising the user and their choice and their privacy. So I'll try and go very quickly through this, but I want to talk a little bit, looking forward after this happens, what does an application start to look like if we're building on an open data network where users are in control and the other kind of Web 3 technologies that a lot of us here are building. So one of the examples that gets talked about a lot in the space is, wouldn't it be great if we had a decentralized Uber? I don't usually love this example because usually it stops at, oh, you could take out the Uber part of the profits and now people just connect directly. It's I don't know, that to me is not that exciting. Yes, Uber takes a big slice, but we can do a lot more than just remove that middleman. So if we think about a decentralized transit or ride-sharing construct a few years from now, when we're building on user-controlled data and open networks, what could this look like? So you've got top various open networks, one for payments, that might be Bitcoin or Ethereum or something else, another open network for location, for maps basically, others for traffic, another for a fleet of drivers. So these are all networks where anybody can participate if they want to, and they're shared across different applications. And then we have an application. Someone's going to make the first ride-sharing application that gets usage, and they might have their app logic, their core business, on a server. That can still be centralized. That doesn't need to be, not everything needs to be decentralized. And at the bottom, we have this portable data and social graph and identity, because remember, if we're all storing our data on this open cloud, if we have control of our data, a lot of that data is social data. It's the connections we have between each other. And so now you liberate the social graph that right now is trapped in LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can actually bring that with you. So if we're having experience on one application, we can take it to another with no friction. And so we're not trapped the way that we are today by the choice of the application at the very beginning. So decentralized ride sharing, maybe it's a little bit cheaper, but then how does this evolve over time? Well, someone else could decide, actually, there needs to be an application that's not just all rides and all drivers, but really only certified, insured, highly rated drivers. Because now you can build a product that's just targeting, maybe it's a little bit more expensive. Now you target parents who only want their kids to be riding with really, really trustworthy drivers. And you can build on the same set of drivers, the same location data, the same traffic data, maybe even some of the same code. A bunch of people are working on really interesting projects to let that happen. And but now you just look to the data cloud and say, okay, who's certified to have a really good reputation? Who's got proof of insurance? And you can have the same scale as before. You don't have to recreate the entire driver network. Now you can build these tailored applications on top of the same network effects. Maybe someone else says, okay, I like that, but actually a lot of people don't just want ride sharing. They just want the cheapest ride they can find. So I'm going to add another open network, like use all of the same stuff as before, add another open network for buses. And now I'm going to build my app logic that says find me the best ride sharing or bus. So this is kind of what Google Maps is trying to do potentially. And maybe someone else says, okay, I'm going to actually do that same thing, build on the same network of drivers, traffic, et cetera. That's all been proven out. I don't need to recreate the wheel. But now I'm going to find a sponsor network who are going to pay riders to watch ads, and that's how these rides are going to be paid for. And so now you have a different set of people, of riders who care about something different, but they don't have to trust a new network to build up an entire set of data and nav instructions because it's built on this open network. Finally, you could say, okay, we're going to make it, in this model, applications are much, much lighter weight. Maybe there's now a plugin that says for these few days, this ride-sharing network is only for people with a ticket to CogX. And so because this data is following you from place to place and the applications are much more lightweight, you can do much more tailored experiences for people, much more personalized experiences, but they are still controlling all of their data. So again, like when we think about what it's enabled when we associate data to a user, put it on an open network, it allows developers, not just users, but like we're not asking users to take much action, but it actually allows developers to build with trust by reducing risk. They don't have to store the data themselves. They can create much more unbounded social experiences that follow you from experience to experience that are trapped inside one application or platform. And now we start to build up this really rich quality data ecosystem where anyone building a user experience can pull on all of that data without having to go buy it or trade it or trust Facebook or Google to provide it. So that's what we're building at $3. Thanks. And I think we're not doing questions now, so I'll pass it up to Marten.
You get just in case I take this one. Hello, 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 everybody. I'm Marten Kaevats from Estonian government. There is a lot of talk about getting your data under control. The best suggestion for all of you here is to become an Estonian. And if you don't want to become an Estonian, you can always become an e-resident. The reason is that we've been building this digital society already for 20 years, and basically we own our own data already 20 years ago. And the points Paul brought out about system architecture, we already built that 20 years ago to build it in a distributed way. So I think we are in this position of actually providing a working live model of this type of examples that were explained before. Well, we're not there yet, but I, as a professional dreamer, I'm guessing we can actually show that in like full working model in 4 or 5 years, perhaps, which shows that every citizen will actually be in control of their own information, and in this similar way the guys before actually explained. But I'm bringing your hopes down a bit. If you want to actually achieve that, whether is it in UK or any other given country where you are, governments are slow as hell. This you probably know. But as we had experience from Estonia over 20 years, and then some academic research also done comparing Estonia, Finland and Denmark, then implementing e-governance, these types of architecture systems, these do not grow exponentially. These go linearly. And the fundamental conclusion from that, this change we're making has got very little to do with technology. This is a change in culture and mindset, and changing that actually does not follow the hockey stick curve. It goes linear. It's much slower. So yes, although in terms of technology, the stuff that these guys are doing, and actually we're implementing it pretty much in the same way as you mentioned it. We are completely reconfiguring our system architecture to small modular pieces that work interoperability together, and with the human in the center and in control. We will have a pilot on health data next year in Estonia, where, for example, if I would go to Finland, Finland is our closest neighbor. We are like brothers in arms. We do this human-centric governance thing together. We also speak the same language. And we both have pretty shitty weather, though here today is worse. In Estonia, it's like plus 30 degrees and the sun is shining, so it's strange. But for example, if I would go to Finland and I would go to ski and I would hurt, my leg would get broken, next year I can share my health records to that particular doctor in Finland. So this means that I can give consent cross-border over my health data rights. So this is a pilot we're having next year, one of the most mission-critical ones in making this kind of a human-centric economy actually happen. So looking at it from a very now global perspective, we see more or less two types of governance models. We see China doing centralized government control one. Basically, Big Brother has settled down in Beijing. We see US doing something which like I call quasi-decentralized, like corporate control. Probably there is different words for that, where the big players are basically doing their thing. I would argue that Estonia, together with Finland, has the best chance globally to build human-centric governance without Big Brother by far. This is our road and mission to actually show you guys in the world that this type, not perhaps you guys, you probably are here, you're already interested in this kind of a topic, but let's say the other slow bureaucratic animals in your respectable governments, to show them that this type of a model in governance actually works at scale. Okay, Estonia is a small country of 1.3 million people, so we can always argue. But in the core of our tech stack and in the mindset of Estonia and Finland, it has been done scalable from the very early on. For the next steps, we are trying to figure out different mechanisms for distributed trust. Things like these guys mentioned. How can you actually build that in various walks of life, whether it's some economical models, some social things, democracy, you name it. And I invite you all to participate. I'm guessing that in a roughly 1 or maybe even 2 years time, we will open up our whole ecosystem so that everybody can actually build those small nodes and those networks that were mentioned in the previous slides. Let's build this model and show the world that we can make this human-centered governance happen so that you or any other given government would actually have an example to build on. Because as we see, and as this is a cultural, not a technological change, then the bigger animals, the governments of Germany, France, UK perhaps, they need some kind of verification and references. And Estonia is, I would argue, one of the best ones to do that. So come and visit us, become e-residents. Currently the weather is much better there, but usually it's not as good. Come during the summer. And let's try to make this type of governance structure actually happen at scale. So thank you. Go.
Good.
You should warn people when you turn this on.
I once went to the toilet with it.
I'm glad I didn't, but I was just
Talk
saying
about that
stuff.
for the panel.
Well, thank you everyone for those fantastic talks. Really covered the range of the issues, and it's great to have a collection of people who are tackling this from all angles. The technology front, the social front, and then applying it in governments. So just to kick things off, wanted to get some more thoughts from this panel on what does the future look like? What's the biggest value that we can unlock by moving towards user-centric and self-sovereign identity?
So, for example, a short answer would be, in Estonia, we are trying to build the whole administrative system as adaptable as possible. We're living in a time where a lot of change is happening. The interval is going faster and faster. So basically, the government's only core function is to build adaptiveness. So with these kind of technologies, we can make systems as adaptive as they possibly can be.
Yeah, and
Okay, go.
go ahead, Paul.
I really like Danny's example of it, which is basically like if we do have these interoperable systems and networks, then the number of permutations of this, the things you can do with identity is explosive, right? So by making the identity not siloed, we can actually build new services almost instantaneously with what people call maybe open data. I'm not sure if that's the best term.
I like it. Yeah, and I do think that's how we'll get there, is that kind of value add, as you said. I do think, though, like the number one reason to do it is big companies or governments having this much data about us is just dangerous. And you look at history and what governments or big companies have done in the past, and then you think about what they could do if they can target each of us in the way that they can now and know that much about it, whether it's political hacking or something that's like pushes that even further. Like, we need to protect ourselves against that.
One argument for the governments is that actually governments don't know shit. They maybe the most critical is the health data part, but Facebook schools, they know much more about you than the government. Sorry, the name, the address, the birthday, well, that's nothing special.
Maybe
Depends
the
on
Chinese,
the government.
Maybe the
Chinese,
Chinese.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
got Snowden and we got stuff.
And India now, too.
Yeah.
And Nare, you actually wrote a very good article which spoke about some of the economic reasons to pursue these opportunities. Do you want to talk about data as the new sugar?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just as you asked the question, what is the world we want to build with us? I think, just like you mentioned, it's today at least, it's more about the world we don't want to end up in. Because it's going to be quite scary and it's going to be worse. The reason I call data the new sugar is we know that products and services with data are a lot better and can get even better if we have this interoperable data. But it's also really, really bad for us, just like sugar is. And the sugar lobby was so good and so wealthy that we all were eating sugar-full products and going away from fat for generations until people started to realize it's really bad. And the consciousness of people started to raise up, and that's how now we know that it is bad, and we move to sugar-free or sugar-less or to different ways of substituting that. I think we will come to that, and the consciousness of people, of actual users, and their desire to buy products that are built in this way is really important, and that's what we're working on at Ntropy.
Do you see a lot of desire from consumers that will actually change their behavior? Like, if they have the choice between a privacy preserving and not, how much will they actually value that?
I'm telling you, your gold mine is 17 to 23-year-old girls who do want privacy-preserving products, and they love the internet, and they're the most viral creatures in the world. So yes, they do want to be treated in a better way.
I think
they
we're
know.
seeing it's sort of like a new financial crisis. So the financial crisis happened, and the internet started printing money, and then like Cambridge Analytica and all this starts coming out, and like now the fines are coming, and people want to own their own identities, and the internet is giving it to us again.
I had this is really uncanny because normally we talk about this in like crypto forums or maybe Discord, Telegram, and then we had this ad going on Instagram, and we had comments of people saying, "Oh, hello Zuck, I know what you're doing to me. You're getting my data. Well, guess what? Everything I'm sharing is fake." So they do know. We do know what's going on, and moving from product to person is definitely going to happen because
Yeah, I click ads of things I don't like just to trick them, right?
I'm perhaps bringing down optimism a little. In Estonia, we have a system called where you can actually track all of the data. Every citizen can go and see and who has changed and what. And actually, roughly 1.5% of the whole population does it. So not many people actually care. Even if you have that possibility, then not many people care. But that's in an environment of Estonia.
And Marten, I specifically wanted to ask you, what have you learned from the population of Estonia implementing these measures? What have they liked? What have they resisted?
So Estonia is a small community, which means that the level of societal trust is higher by design because of the small size. So I think in the end, these examples are really, really good and necessary. Don't get me wrong. I'm just. I think we need to build this like acknowledgement. We need to acknowledge these issues better. Okay, currently the teenage girls are the most active ones, but how do we get everyone on board, and how do we build the systems not only by awareness but also just through tech measures like you are doing, so that it would be like secure by design.
And have you had success with specific initiatives to get people more involved?
Basically, well, don't have a good example to share you, but basically the main point being that not many people in Estonia care because the level of trust towards the government is high enough. So.
I just want to go kind of a bit further from kind of the whole idea of 16-year-old girls, because it sounds really funny and funky, but actually these are the people who are going to go to work, who are going not to want to have an email service that knows everything about them and one that's secure when they're working, who are going to want to have a professional platform where they can be connected, where not all their information is out there, who will track their health, and not want that data from genetics to, when they ovulate, go to Facebook to show them ads. So I think it is a generational problem, and we have started to do this now, and it's great that these measures exist, but as this generation changes, it's going to be harder to fuck them over.
I'm very encouraged to hear the research you've done, that you're finding that, because we had started to think kind of along the lines that you said, like, yes, there's going to be a vocal minority that really cares, that wants to own their data and not be compromised in that way, but that most people aren't going to be willing to take their action. And so hearing that there's a shift, whether that's demographic or just as people become more aware, I think that'll help a lot. And I think it remains to be seen how quickly that happens, but it's encouraging.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have been talking about all these issues and the bright future that's ahead of us for a long time. But as we've seen, even in Estonia, adoption can be slow. What are some of the big catalysts that we can look forward to, or is it just time and generation?
Well, I think interoperability is a huge one, because through that you can unlock things that you cannot do today, and it's new products and services. If you can get an Uber that knows exactly where you want to get, and also the type of music you want to listen to, whether you want to talk to the driver or not, probably people will be more likely to use it.
Beyond that, like if you look at existing systems, and we're just starting to see this now. So there's a DID spec, basically for these identifiers that exist on the blockchain, that's meant to be consistent, at least across players playing in decentralized identity. And of course we've got the 3ID, which is even more baller, I think is the term. But we are starting to see a shift from older identity systems adopting these methods. So when the older systems adopt these methods, then things can play well with Active Directory and the rest of it, then it unlocks a whole new internet of value. And the degree of decentralization is a question mark, right? You can have centralized identities using the DID specification, and then you can have more decentralized systems and governance that create these resilient, censorship-resistant identities. And when these play well together, then you can put them everywhere.
I would agree with the point of interoperability and the point that Paul actually made previously, to make the likelihood of future option much bigger. If you may build interoperability in a way that the likelihood is not just linear, like A to B, but A to a three-dimensional space, that gives you lots of more options to play around with.
Yeah, and maybe this is obvious, but I think it's worth saying. Like all of these you have to create economic value, basically, if you want this to get adopted. And like seeing a better future and building awareness is very important. But the interoperability unlocks new experiences that people can capitalize on. Or, GDPR and other regulations now are making it more and more costly for people to take a chance of not securing user data. There is value there. Now, I don't think most of us are relying on regulation to push this, but it is a tailwind. And every time Zuckerberg or Facebook puts their foot in their mouth, it helps all of us make the pitch to other developers that there's a better way to do things now. So we have to value add on top of the current system if we want the new future to come to pass.
Do you see more demand coming from traditional developers wanting to integrate Web3 components into their applications now?
So I would say more interest. I think that this technology is still pretty early, and we have a lot to prove that we can work as well as existing technology, just from a user experience and reliability perspective. But yes, a lot of people are very interested in it. You've seen more and more applications shift away from Facebook Connect because of the data issues, dating apps in particular. So kind of leading the way for reasons that you can guess. So yeah, there's definitely demand there once the tech catches up.
I'd like to say that for a developer, it's a huge risk still, because if you're developing a product for mass market, for users, you want to use a system that's the most liable, that is scalable, that you know works and has worked in the past. So decentralization is a cost, and it is going to be a cost. And unless we have the reward that's bigger, and that's why we're starting with building the super personal profiles, is they won't come. They need that reward. They need to know it works, and it's going to be better to take the risk.
On the developer side, obviously, like 2017 brought a whole lot of attention and talent into this space, and then when it was washed out, I think the space is sort of rationalized, but we did hold on to a lot of like very smart people who are building. So I think within the community itself, it's like an obsessive community of people who are willing to take pay cuts and the rest of it to work on a project they see as the future. And that kind of activity and attention, it seems to me like the development community is at least here to stay for a while. Whoever's left after we wash them out in the crypto winter.
And just one more question for me, and then I think we'll have time for a couple from the audience. So think about your most burning question now. Where geographically will we see the most movement globally, or where by industry do you think it'll happen first? Estonia.
Well,
You missed your question.
We are still a very small country. I think from the government domain we can provide, and as an example, but in terms of private sector and others, sorry, we're not competing.
I think it's also a little bit about use case. So when you say where geographically, like who is in the need of this identity? So if we look at the bottom of the pyramid stuff, this was a lot of the first implementations, right? So if the government doesn't have your ID and you're a refugee, how do you exist? There's a billion people that just don't exist digitally. So giving these people identities has been a huge push, and then they can actually like move to other countries and have some sort of track record and history. So geographically, maybe it's in terms of need. So I think of it as very use case driven. I'm not sure if you're in that same boat.
Yeah, I mean, I have conflicting thoughts on this. I mean, not to play up Estonia too much, but I do believe that some of the first use cases will be in small, dense communities of some kind. Now, whether that's Estonia, who's pushing on the government side, or in more emerging economies where there are use cases that aren't hit well by existing options in technology. The reason that I think small communities really matter is exactly what you said around this pre-existing level of trust.
Yeah.
And so if you look at a lot of the barriers in the space, like key management, for example, is like the biggest barrier right now. And one of the more exciting options to kind of get past that is social recovery. You trust your friends or other people around you or even other institutions to basically keep your password and help you recover it if you lose it. Now, where's that going to work best? In like a huge country or like a place where you don't really know people and don't really trust institutions, or in a place where you have a base level of trust and everybody's onboarding at the same time and you have those connections. And so I think there will be very defined use cases in an already existing community where they can catch on, start to build up some momentum, and then we'll see it kind of grow from there.
I still have not lost hope in the West. I know a lot of people have. I think the liberal thought has a long way to go, and kind of people wanting to be free to own their own identity and systems. And I do agree that in small communities, when it's easier to do when there's more trust. But I do think that in the West there will be adoption, just because we are used to at least thinking that we have this freedom here.
And Apple is launching their own ID.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be interesting when you can just start integrating this stuff straight out of the Apple development kit.
Yeah.
So from the crowd, anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Arwen Smit from the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative. So my question is actually about Apple. So for those who don't know, in the room, Apple launched their sign in with Apple feature last week, I believe. And I think personally it's going to be an absolute game changer, because it's going to be mandatory for any app that currently has third-party login in the app. So let's just put competitive considerations aside for a moment, what do you think it would mean for the adoption of self-sovereign identity? Because as you mentioned, Danny, the app that you're going to put in front of new users needs to be X times better in order for them to switch. Now, if Apple has a solution where the process is going to take place on the edge or some type of distributed computing, and the option that you can sever relationships while still retaining that control, what would it mean for the adoption of self-sovereign identity for the next 5 years? Anyone?
So I can start, which is to say I haven't fully wrapped my mind around it yet. I think it depends how they choose to use it. And so their solution could play very well with user-centric data or with other biometric solutions and be just the really, really secure edge to authenticate. And that might be a huge boon for all the people developing in the space. Or they could go a different direction and I am a little bit distrustful of large Silicon Valley corporations these days. And they did miss the boom on taking advantage of big data. And this may be a way for them to kind of claw their way back into owning that identity and data experience. And so I think it really depends how they go with it. I also think both Facebook and Apple are going to be facing huge antitrust cases. And we're going to see how that plays out too. So I do think them pushing privacy is net very good. And I don't know what it means for all the companies in the space yet.
Yeah, I will say, Apple has traditionally been an ecosystem player, so they're trying to lock you into a certain set of apps and services, and a lot of the, value in sovereign identity is moving between different systems easily. So Apple can choose to play well with sovereign identities, and I don't see them actively doing it right now. They're not involved in the working groups. So, as this identity evolves, I think they're trying to own privacy and identity to a certain degree.
And then I think we had a question from over here.
Usage. It's like developer usage for us. Like getting a lot of data onto the network is prove that you've built something very valuable first and figure out how to make money off of it later. It's not quite that simple, but in our space, just getting traction is step number one.
Yeah, I can speak to us in particular. We're a protocol, so we're looking for people to build on top of the platform. So that's a key metric. But on the other side, we can think of the identity mechanism as a distribution mechanism. So the more places we are, the more value-added services, which I touched on, you can add to these identities. And we can take a piece of that.
For us, it's users and the data points, the amount of data that is decentralized and belongs to you.
Yeah, from government, it's very open. It's trust, the most broadest way.
Excellent. Well, panelists, thank you very much. This was a great discussion.